Hey everyone, so I'm starting with Learning Target 1B, which is titled Connections in Ancestral History. This first video will have questions number 1 and 2, and then we will talk about cladograms and phylogenetic trees in a separate video and quite a bit in class. So the first one is, can you describe the core conserved processes among the 3 domains, bacteria, archaea, and eukarya? So this conserved core process supports the relatedness of these 3 domains. So we are looking at the evidence that shows that these 3 domains started together with that common ancestor and expanded from there. So the reason that things have been passed along is because it worked. So why change something? It's going to improve the fitness of other organisms to pass that along, just like our traits that we pass along to our children and in natural selection. We keep what is good and we get rid of what doesn't work. So it's the same thing here. So we are conserving the things that are working well. The first thing that is conserved, that is considered a conserved process, are several metabolic pathways. You don't need to know all of them. However, I want you to at least know one of them and really understand that one. On your test, if they ask you about these, it's more than likely going to be just list or explain one example, maybe 2, but I think it's okay for this one. It's safe to say that you can just have one memorized. So I think that the most important one is glycolysis, which is the breaking down of glucose. Once again, here's our root word. Lysis is to break apart. So glycolysis, breaking down of those glucose molecules. So first thing, several metabolic pathways are conserved in all organisms. They all share that. The next one are some physical structures that have similarities. So for example, one of them is on a cellular level is that all eukaryotes have membrane-bound organelles. And you'll see that within each of our domains that there are a lot of similarities, especially within the separate domains. The most convincing one is the carriers of genetic information. All living things have genetic information. All living things store that genetic information in DNA and RNA. It is that same exact process of transcription, translation, understanding that DNA basically is going to give us our proteins that we need for life. So what's even crazier is that all DNA is made up of the same 4 base pairs: adenine and thymine, guanine and cytosine. Also, all RNA is made up of adenine and uracil, cytosine and guanine. So it's crazy, really, if you think about that every single living organism is made up of, or has genetic information in the first place, and that it stores that genetic information in the same exact way. It is just too big of a similarity to discount it. So that's where we get kind of funky with viruses, because they do store their genetic information in a different way. They store it in RNA, and so it makes things a little questionable as to whether or not they're technically alive. So most scientists will say that viruses are not actually alive. So once again, our core conserved processes are our metabolic pathways, some sort of structures that have characteristics that are similar to one another, and most importantly, DNA and RNA. Gotta know that one, storing genetic information. All right, our second question. Can you infer common ancestry among organisms based on shared characteristics? This is kind of a tough question because your answer to it is really yes and no. Yeah, we can infer ancestry or common ancestry based off of some characteristics, because you assume that when you look at something that has similar traits, that it probably shares a lot of the same DNA that coded for those traits. So yeah, it more than likely is going to have common ancestry. So most of the time it's safe to say yes. However, it's not always the case. So sometimes things that look very similar actually have completely different ancestries. And we talked about that last video with analogous structures, analogous versus homologous structures. So we have something that is called convergent evolution, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Things are converging. So we have two structures that are formed similarly but don't have the same common ancestor. So another example of this would be sharks and dolphins. So as you can see in the picture here, we have our dolphin and sharks, and this is a great example of convergent evolution because we see that similar body shape. However, if it was developed or passed along by a common ancestor, everything in that area above, including bony fishes and amphibians, would also have the same body shape. But that is obviously not the case. We can see amphibians right next to it with a very different body shape. So this is a perfect example of common ancestry. So while it's often okay to say that yes, shared characteristics means common ancestry, there are also a lot of cases that demonstrate that no, in fact, even if they have a similar body shape, that you're going to have to do more digging before you can definitely say that it has common ancestry. Now, the way that we can do that is by looking at our DNA and our molecular evidence. So we can see, okay, well, actually in the DNA, how many similarities do we have and how many differences? Through that DNA, we're able to see, okay, this is closer related to this, and actually they don't share a common ancestor. So I'll show you examples of cladograms and phylogenetic trees that are going to help us to do that later. But I would recommend at the bottom of the page here, I have a link to Nova. I think it's the very top one actually. And if you go through Nova, that's a really good training on how to do phylogenetic trees and cladograms before we do that in class, and it will definitely teach you the basics.